Hello, everyone. Welcome to another The Intel with Greg Cosell on the Inside the Birds platform. I'm Geoff Mosher from Inside the Birds, alongside my Inside the Birds co-host Adam Caplan, and of course, with us, as always, is the star of the show, Greg Cosell, who's going to spend this episode breaking down the Eagles' additions. I was going to say Eagles draft picks, but obviously they made a huge addition over draft weekend with wide receiver AJ Brown, and we will get Greg's dissection on that. And then after this, Greg, I guess you walk off into the sunset. We'll have to figure out.
Well, I hope not, guys.
another
I
way.
hope you don't forget about me,
No, we won't forget
There's
about
a
it.
lot of off-season chatter,
Sure,
and
sure.
since I know Caplan, he can BS with the best of them, so I can join him, and
Tell
do
me
that as
about it.
well.
Tell me about it. But this will be the final, the Intel with Greg Cosell for this. And then, of course, we'll have you back doing some other stuff down the road, of course. So let's get started, Greg. The Eagles drafted a guy that became fascinating for us as we did homework, but also after the show that we did with you on defensive linemen, you had some very legitimate, very fair questions about the value of drafting a defensive lineman who in college played very limited snaps and did not rush the passer. So since we've done that show with you and you asked those very, very fair questions, and the Eagles then went and moved up to take Jordan Davis, what is your viewpoint? Have you heard anything? What is anything that you've seen more in tape that has changed the discussion, or are you still wondering the same questions from then?
Well, I think there are legitimate questions. I think the Eagles clearly believe, or you would not take him at 13, that as he progresses, whether it's getting him down to 320, whether it's just his overall remarkable athletic traits for a man that size, that he is going to be more than a 20-snap-a-game player who only plays in your base defense. Otherwise, they would not have made the draft choice. It's not for me to say that he can't do that. He's obviously a unique athlete for a man that size. That's highly evident. I was trying to raise the questions that I guarantee were discussed not only in the Eagles draft room, but across the league. When a defensive tackle plays 20, 22 snaps a game, somewhere in that range, and does not play on third down, it's a very legitimate question. I had this conversation with someone who does a lot of work that Adam knows for teams, and we texted back and forth, and he said to me point blank that I would not draft him in the top 15 based on his college resume. So I was raising the question. Obviously, the guy's a phenomenal athlete for a man that size. He was a basketball player in high school. He's not – his athletic traits are not in question, but it was his deployment. And to make the argument, well, he didn't need to do that in college, and that's not what he was asked to do. That's true. But the question then becomes, and that's why I don't work for a team, so I'm not having this conversation with Kirby Smart or Dan Lanning, was their DC, now the head coach at Oregon. I'm not having that conversation as to why they chose to use him the way they did. If they thought he was a dominant inside pass rusher, don't you think he would have been on the field?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I'm just raising the question, and like I said, I guarantee it was discussed in draft rooms.
Yeah, we actually checked into it because we were curious. Geoff and I had a pretty good idea he was the guy they were going to draft. We talked about him last Thursday on our show, that he was one of the guys they were looking at. And we know how big they are on analytics, but yet they've drafted some guys who don't quite match up to analytics. In fact, they like McDuffie. Geoff had said on our show that dropped on Monday, they might have drafted him at 18 had he been there. If they'd stayed the same, obviously.
Right.
I
love McDuffie.
Okay. So let's get back to Davis. Geoff and I have some information why he was playing limited snaps. So let's put that to the side. That's not even the point. The point is, what did the tape look like to you? What do you see that's in his body?
Well, here's how I'm going to answer that. I think he's incredibly strong. I think that there's very few guys that I've seen that can hold the point the way that Jordan Davis can. And he does have the ability, and it showed up on tape, and you did see it, no question. He had the ability to control and displace. That's the term we use. So he could control an offensive lineman in front of him, he could displace him, and he could make plays in the run game. He did that. That was his game in college. He was outstanding at it. The more I watched him, and I actually spoke with a strength and conditioning coach in the league about this, because it always seemed to me that he was dragging one of his legs. And that's to me why I felt he didn't play with power. Okay. And there's a difference between strength and power, as we discussed. Strength is controlling an area. Power is strength in motion. Power involves force and velocity. And so there were times I did not see that, where he sort of was a leaner, not a mover. Now, I don't know if he has an injury. That I can't speak to. But I'm just telling you that I had this conversation. My guess is if there was an injury and if he maybe loses some weight, I personally believe, and again, I'm not the trainer, I'm not a strength guy, I personally believe you got to get him down to 320. And then I think you could move him into being a potentially dominant player beyond just a rundown player. There were certainly snaps at Georgia where he did walk back a center or a guard right into the pocket. The question is, will he walk back Quentin Nelson into the pocket? You know, that's a question you have to decide as you evaluate him. He clearly has enough movement ability with his athleticism to do more than just walk back guys. But I think you have to decide if that's something with training, with nutrition, with all those things that NFL teams do, that he can become that guy. But there's certain things he does exceptionally well, and there's other things you'd like to see more of that are in his body you would just like to see more of.
I'll run some names past you, because in my draft prep, talking to teams, a couple of names came up. And of course, when we do comps, they're never apples to apples, but there are certain qualities or certain positional traits that are similar.
They're fun.
Right. Sure. So we talk about, I've heard Haloti Ngata's name come up. I've heard Vita Vea's name come up. And even going back to the old Jacksonville Jaguars, when they had Henderson and Stroud. I think Stroud was the bigger kind of nose tacklish type guy that they had.
I've heard people mention Albert Hainsworth.
Oh, no, that's an interesting one too. And none of those I'm going to set Hainsworth aside. The Veas, the Haloti Ngatas were not known as 10 to 12 sack guys, but they're very, valuable for their team for what they did.
Correct.
Is that theoretically how we should view what the Eagles see of Jordan Davis? Is that he's going to have not just his individual, what he does as an individual, but how he's going to impact the line and maybe the back end of your defense with what he brings from run stopping and then other areas of what they want to do?
I don't think there's any question, Geoff, the Eagles see him that way down the road. Vita Vea and Todd Bowles' defense in Tampa, there were times he lined up as a wide 9 defensive end and rushed the quarterback. Vita Vea has incredibly light feet. Vita Vea, if I'm not mistaken, might have been a running back in high school, but I could be wrong. Someone could easily check that. That's true, isn't it?
Yeah, him and Elijah Qualls, who was a same school and an Eagles draft pick, same position, nose tackle, was also a running back. I remember that because I heard that both.
Vea has incredibly light feet, which showed up when I watched him at UW. So is Jordan Davis that level of athlete? He clearly appears to be. Clearly. The Eagles clearly made this pick expecting him because Fletcher Cox, I would guess, Adam, you guys would know this more than I would imagine Fletcher Cox is a 1-year guy, maybe 2 years at the very most. And I would expect that Jordan Davis, he was not drafted. You guys know this. This is not a profound statement. He was not drafted to play 20 snaps a game for the next 5 years.
Yep.
That's not why he was drafted. He was drafted to move into a position where he's playing at least 40 snaps a game, if not more. And so that the Eagles clearly, this is a projection, and that's what you do in the draft with certain players. You have to project. And they made a projection that he can be a dominant inside force playing 40, 50. Look, Fletcher Cox had games where he played 70 snaps. That whether that happens with Jordan Davis, none of us can say, but there's no doubt he was not. The Eagles did not trade up to get Jordan Davis to play 20 snaps a game starting next year. That might be the case this year, but it certainly won't be the case next year.
And real quick, as an addition to that, we saw last year what Jonathan Gannon wanted to do early, which did not work, versus what he felt he needed to do late, which worked. And a lot of that was schematic. There were some personnel changes, but we talked about starting off playing a lot of cover 2 and getting run on right up the gut. Then he brought the safety into the box, switched them things around, had more success. Does a Jordan Davis theoretically on the field doing what he's supposed to do, do you feel like Jonathan Gannon will at least try when he's out there to do a little bit more of that cover two that they started off last year, believing that they're better equipped now to stop the run with a guy like Davis and then even some of the other guys they've brought in to be able to do that?
I would think that if Davis develops and he plays on base downs, which might be the goal, because, I mean, who knows? Maybe he replaces Fletcher Cox on base downs because Cox is older. Maybe
Right.
Cox becomes the pass rusher. And maybe it's Davis and Hargrave playing on base downs. But they're a five-man front, so their base would be a 5-2. My guess is you'll see more quarters, not cover two. You'll see 5-2 with quarters behind it. That would be my guess.
All right, let's move on to their second round pick, Cam Jurgens, 19th in the round, 51st overall. And one of the things I found interesting, Greg, was that Geoff and I talked to some personnel people after he was selected, and they all kind of agreed he's not a guard. He hasn't played it. It's just not big enough physically. Now, they're going to cross-train at it, so we certainly could ask you what you see in his body, but from an athletic standpoint, it apparently matches what they're looking for. So what did the tape look like to you?
Well, you have to start with it. Remember that he's a tight end who bulked up to play the offensive line. So he may not have it in his body to get any bigger. He may be maxed out from a size standpoint. He was 303 at the combine, and that surprised people because my guess is he did not play at 303. So he may be maxed out. Another guy who I believe was drafted not really to play this year because he's not ready to play this year. His tape was a little sketchy, but he's incredibly athletic. When he moves up to the second level, he really looks like a live, loose athlete. When he pulls, he really looks live and loose. And when he made really good blocks off movement, he generated force and power because his movement is really, really good. He's kind of sudden and twitched up for an offensive center because he's a bulked up tight end. So he's much more of an athletic offensive center than a power offensive center. In that way, I guess you could say he's very much like Jason Kelce. There's not a lot of mass to his body frame. And like I said, it's not likely you can add a whole lot more to it. So he needs probably a year. If all goes well, he's not going to play this year because they don't have an opening on their offensive line. So I think he needs to develop some more core strength. I think he needs to learn better how to use his arms. He didn't really use his arms. I think there was an inconsistency to his game in winning at the point of attack. I made the point in my notes that the athletic movement traits will get people excited, but there's much work to get done to become a quality starting center. And I think they know this. And my guess is, look, I know teams that had Jurgens rated higher than Linderbaum. I don't fancy myself an offensive line guru, but I did not.
On top of that, I know Adam had a good note that some teams he spoke to felt that the one issue that Jurgens may have was sorting the traffic, which is a common phrase. Is that something? Can you kind of detail? I know what that means, but detail for the listeners of what that entails and what you saw on that.
Well, there's different ways to sort traffic. There's the run game and the pass game. Let's start with the pass game first and foremost, because sorting traffic in the pass game means that you're going to get stunts and you're going to get pressures from defenses. Those are two different things. Stunts involve the defensive line 99% of the time. Pressures usually involve a second or third level defender adding into the rush. So you have to be able to react to that and on the move, once the ball's snapped, figure out who you have. The term that I like to use is accelerated vision. You have to be able to see after the snap of the ball how all that's playing out. And keep in mind, you have about a millimeter of a second to figure that out. So again, a guy that doesn't have a background playing the position of offensive line, that becomes a little more difficult simply because he hasn't done it. Same thing with the run game. So let's say it's a zone run. If the defensive line, let's say, slants, all of a sudden the person that you thought you were going to block, because it's a zone scheme, so it's not based on I got that guy. It's based on who's there in front of you. Because if you stop teams that are really good with zone run, everybody looks the same. It's like synchronized swimming. All offensive linemen, literally, their shoulders look the same. Their feet movements look the same. Everything looks the same. Okay, you can put on the 49ers, and because they're a master at the zone run game, and everything looks the same with their offensive line. So you have to be able to let's sort that out as well. So all of a sudden, if the defensive line slants, you're not chasing that guy that you thought you were going to block in your area. You're not chasing him. You're now moving on to the next guy that's going to appear in your area because it's zone, not man. That has to be sorted out as well. So there's different ways of sorting things out, whether it's the run game or pass protection. And he doesn't have a ton of experience because he hasn't been playing offensive line since he's 12 years old. That all makes sense, Geoff?
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah. So when you look at this situation with Jurgens, you've always said to us, I love this line, no player is ever you're fully developed when they're drafted.
Oh, of course not. They're college players. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And he's relatively new to playing offensive line. And now the other part of it is, and you were talking about how big he is physically. He looks like to be a pretty damn good athlete based on what people tell us. But playing at guard, Greg, you're talking about he's got a tight end's body. Can he really play there?
Guard?
Yeah, guard. Do you see him there?
I'm going to be honest, and just so people understand that there's some things I feel I know a whole lot about, and other things I would struggle with. I could he play guard? I don't know. My sense is no, but I'm not Jeff Stoutland, who certainly knows a hell of a lot more than I do about offensive line play. So sure. I think he was drafted to replace Kelsey. Because
we know that. Yeah.
Dickerson was really good this year at guard. I think he's only going to get better because I still think Dickerson was fighting through that knee injury. I think it was clear that he was a dominant run blocker. I think he'll get better in pass pro. I think he struggled a little bit in pass pro this year, which probably was a function of the injury. I think Jurgens was drafted personally, and I haven't spoken to anybody in the organization, but I think he was drafted to replace Jason Kelsey when Kelsey retires. That's what I think.
Sure. Yeah. And I would say conceptually, Greg, I think even if Jeff Stoutland, and they're going to cross-train him because they do that with everybody, even if Jeff Stoutland could get Cam Jurgens to the point where he's an adequate guard and they had injuries there that forced him in, I think you'd have to wonder about the impact of an offensive line that has a sort of just barely 300-pound center and a just barely 300-pound right guard. That's not a lot of mass for the interior of your offensive line. Now, they both individually can sometimes compensate with their athleticism, but two guys of that size right next to each other would be a little bit of a concern for me, especially against some of the bigger fronts of the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, then you have to decide how you feel about that as a team. That's the question. I mean, can it be done? It probably can. The Eagles there's a lot of misdirection and deception in the Eagles run game. There's a lot of zone principles. It's not 100%, obviously. The belief has always been if you run zone, it's okay to have lighter guys if they move well. If you're going to run more gap scheme, which is man principles, you need more girth and mass and power. So, they also, with everything they've done, clearly, guys, we're going to get to this. They clearly want to throw the ball more with more, and what would be considered, and this is a very 30,000-foot statement, which would be considered more NFL pass game concepts. They signed Zach Pascal, not an unimportant signing, by the way. They obviously just traded for A.J. Brown. We'll get to him, a big-time NFL wideout. Personally, I don't believe they want their offense to look like it did the last 7 or 8 games last year. I think they want elements of that because that does play to Jalen Hurts' strength. You want the zone run element to always be a factor because it stresses and challenges and dictates defensive alignment and reaction. So you want that element for sure. And you don't want to take away Jalen Hurts' ability to impact the game with his legs. You're not looking to take that away. But on the other hand, and Adam knows this, I had conversations at the combine as Adam did. Maybe you did too, Geoff. I saw Adam more than I saw you.
I work harder.
Which was a shame for me, but hey, that's the way it worked out.
Hey,
But
that's it. I had.
But the point is that there were people who told me, defensive coaches, who basically said the Eagles' pass game was not that difficult to defend.
Right.
Yeah.
So they want, and you don't think, of course, Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni and Brian Johnson and everybody and Shane Steichen, they know this. These guys are NFL coaches. They're not stupid. They want their pass game to be more than it is, and that's why all these moves were made. They do not want the offense to solely look like it did the last 7-8 games of last year.
No doubt. Sounds like a great segue for, taking a break from the draft picks to talk about A.J. Brown and the impact that he'll have on the Eagles offense. First of all, they give up first and third. When it happened, Greg, what was your thought process, and how do you see him in this Eagles offense? And give me sort of your tape breakdown of A.J. Brown and what to expect.
A.J. Brown is a great receiver. I mean, it was interesting. The first thing I thought of, what was interesting to me, because I had this conversation with Mike Tannenbaum, and Adam might know this, about how some teams are going to pay for wide receivers and other teams won't, because there's always wide receivers in the pipeline. We know that the Dolphins and Eagles are two teams that are willing to pay for wide receivers with an NFL track record. The Titans were not. So what they did is they traded A.J. Brown. They did not want to pay him $100 million. They know he's great, and that's not the point. But they just didn't want to pay a wide receiver that much money. So what did they do? They drafted Treylon Burks, who's essentially, many, including myself, compared Treylon Burks' tape to A.J. Brown. So they just drafted his replacement, knowing they don't have to pay him $100 million. Whether it works, only time will tell. But that's just kind of an overview statement. Now to get to A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown fits the Eagles like a freaking glove, because he came from an offense that, even though they didn't run exactly what the Eagles run, there was a ton of quick game. A.J. Brown is a master at running slant routes, glance routes. He's an animal after the catch. He's super competitive. He's big. He's physical. He's got a little wiggle to him. He fits perfectly, because what are the Eagles going to do? RPOs, quick game, everything that makes it look like Jalen Hurts could run the ball, and then they're going to stick him on those short routes, and he's phenomenal run after catch. He'll be the boundary X. Now Devonta Smith can be the Z, which is what I think he's most, that would be at his best, because now you get him off the ball. You can motion him. He becomes your movement receiver. He gets free access off the line of scrimmage with those long strides where he's not going to be pressed if he's in motion. It really just enhances his strengths. So you've got your classic boundary X in Brown, who's as physical and competitive as they come. And now you have Smith, who had a phenomenal year. And I heard phenomenal things from coaches at the Combine about Smith's rookie year. They thought he was tremendous, as the tape showed, by the way. So it's really a really good deal for the Eagles.
Greg, just one thing to follow up here. You've told us, when we've talked about Brown over the years, one of my favorite plays to watch, because you're able to name it, is the bang play action.
The bang play action, yes.
Yeah, let's explain to our listeners and viewers on YouTube.
The bang play action is different from, let's say, an RPO. It has a look like an RPO, but it's not really an RPO. See, that's the thing. A lot of these things start to look the same. And I have this discussion with my friend Roger Pollard, who's worked with me for 12 years on the matchup show. We sit here and we watch some of these plays, and Roger knows, Adam knows who Roger is.
Great guy.
And we watch these plays and we say, hey, is that an RPO or is that just a play action pass? Because sometimes you don't know. But the bang play action, and the Patriots have done it for years with Tom Brady when Brady was a Patriot, where it can happen either under center or in the gun, where it's basically 3-step drop timing, maybe quick 5-step drop timing, where the quarterback, either it's conventional play action if he's under center, it's quick play action if he's in the gun, and what you're counting on is the reaction of linebackers to step up, and you stick an inside throw between the hashes right behind them. And it's timing. It's all timing. I mean, many people listening to this, if they watch other teams, can probably see Brady to Gronkowski all the time, sticking that throw right behind the linebackers. Gronkowski has room to run, but it can also happen. With wide receivers on slant routes.
Right. So
that's
that'll
what
be something
essentially
that,
bang play action is.
gotcha.
Well, just to follow up on that, Greg, one other thing is Titans source said to me, last fall, he goes, he seemingly always wins. Is that accurate when you watch tape? Does AJ Brown seemingly always win?
AJ Brown's one of those guys that wins even when he doesn't win because he's so physical. Like, I hate him. Look, AJ Brown's put up phenomenal numbers. I know he's hurt a little bit this year. He's put up phenomenal numbers in his 3 years. Even being hurt a little this year, his numbers were still pretty good. I hate comparing him to, big-time Hall of Famers, but there's a little Michael Irvin in his game. Just the physicality and the fact that he takes no prisoners. I mean, he's a really good receiver. He ended up – I liked him coming out, but he's been better than I thought he'd be. And he does have, in an odd way, even though he ran well at the combine, but he's got some vertical ability as well. It's very interesting because he doesn't look like he's that guy, but he does have that ability.
Would I be correct, Greg, if I said that the Titans see, because of Derrick Henry, a lot more safety in the box, bigger fronts than the Eagles did? Because I know the Eagles had a great running game last year, but I still feel like they were defended nickel and a lot of two safety high in a lot of situations. Would I be correct in that?
You mean how the Eagles were defended?
Compared to how the Titans were defended, yeah.
Oh, well, the Titans are a totally different animal. Even though the Eagles had a great run game, the Titans even though Tannehill's mobile, they didn't really run those kinds of plays unless it was 3rd and 2 or the red zone or a critical situation. That wasn't a foundational piece of their offense the way the Eagles use Jalen Hurts as a runner, as a foundational piece. So yes, teams defended them differently because don't forget, I know last year the Titans did not have Derrick Henry for a good part of the season, but essentially teams are defending Derrick Henry in what's a far more conventional run game than what the Eagles present. Even though the Eagles had very conventional run plays, obviously, Jordan Howard is a conventional back. It's a different animal. When you're preparing to play the Eagles in your week of practice and game planning versus comparing to play the Titans in your week of game planning, it's a different approach.
Sure. So I guess what I was trying to get at was the things that AJ Brown does really well, the strengths that he brings, can they be brought the same way to the Eagles, who are typically defended differently? Like most teams aren't defended the way the Titans offense is when Derrick Henry is on the field.
Well, the Titans are unique in the league to that regard because they're the most run-based offense in the league with the when healthy, the best and biggest back in the league. As far as running the football, I'm talking about.
Sure. And I'm just because AJ Brown is not a 6'3", 6'4" guy.
He's like 6 feet 225.
Exactly.
He is a man. AJ Brown's really good. You guys know me well enough to know I wouldn't say that if I didn't really believe it. I don't just talk about guys, oh man, he's great. AJ Brown's really a good player. Really good player. And he's a tone setter. There's a physicality and toughness to the way in which he plays that's contagious.
So everything he does well, you believe, can adapt basically what you said to the Eagles
fits the
offense,
Eagles
no matter
perfectly.
how they're defended.
It fits the Eagles perfectly.
Okay. Awesome. Adam, let's move
back to the draft picks.
Yeah, let's go back to the draft picks. Nakobe Dean. How did you see
Nakobe
him?
Dean is a fascinating player. Nakobe Dean is a really good prospect. The issue with Dean, and it's not an issue, it's just the way teams think, is he's on the bottom end of the spectrum as far as height. And there'll be some teams that would argue that, that's a problem. Maybe some teams don't think it's a problem. That's the way it works, as you guys know when you talk about the draft. I think what Nick Bolton did in Kansas City last year leads a lot of people to believe that it's not as big an issue as you might think, because Nick Bolton, I believe, was also under 6 feet, and he had a very, very good season at Kansas City, including playing in some of their nickel defense and a lot of their nickel. So Nakobe Dean, his tape's really good. And because Kirby Smart is one of the few college coaches, probably due to his background, obviously he's got a Nick Saban background, maybe due to others as well, who's one of the I don't want to say the few because I don't see them all, obviously, but is one of the college coaches. They're not in abundance, let's put it that way, that actually ran NFL pressure concepts. So Nakobe Dean was featured as a blitzer, and he was a really, really good blitzer. So the question becomes, is there scheme specificity to Dean? Do you need to deploy him that way because he's so good at that? If not, I'm not saying you never blitz him, but he blitzed a lot at Georgia. Now, he's a stacked backer. That's what he played at Georgia. Now, he's got really high-level run and chase qualities. He's most effective when he can be clean to the football. Although I thought there were snaps at Georgia where he proactively played through contact and worked through contact, because he is physical. He's just not big. Okay. He is physical though, and willing to be physical. He played in a Georgia defense that asked him to shoot gaps and blitz, as I said, ran a lot of stun concepts. He's got great short area quickness and explosiveness in the box. He's got sudden movement in the box. He saw things quickly. He's a really good player. I think people were surprised that he dropped. It could have been a function of injury. Adam, you would know better. It could have been a function of the fact that, hey, he's 5'11 and a half, and some teams didn't feel comfortable drafting a stack backer who's 5'11 and a half.
Yeah, I mean, injuries. Go ahead, Adam.
I was just going to say, you mentioned the injuries. Yeah, we both heard similar stuff. Stuff that you can't measure. The leadership is incredible. Super, super smart. Intellectually off the field and from a football standpoint.
Great kid. From everything I hear, he's a great,
incredible.
This could be, I'm sure when the Eagles got to their pick and he was sitting there, Geoff, I'm sure it was a no-brainer. I mean, it's a position of need, and he's that guy. I mean, when I say that guy, no one was going to say he's a top 5 pick in the draft, but he was a high-level college football player at a national championship school in the best conference in the country. The traits are there on tape. It's not as if the traits aren't there. You see the traits. The only concern is the 5'11 and a half and the injury factor, which I know he's had some injuries. But, it picked, was it 82?
83. 83.
Makes perfect sense. It's a great, as we sit here today, okay, and that's the only way we can do this. We don't know what tomorrow is. We don't know what the future holds. As we sit here today, it was a no-brainer pick and a great draft choice based on everything we know as we speak today.
Yeah. Do you, Greg, see him as a middle linebacker in their scheme?
He's a stack backer. You can ultimately, if you're going to play a 5-2 front in your base, you have 2 stack backers. There's not a true Mike per se.
Right.
You have 2 stack backers.
Yep. Okay.
If you're going to play him in your nickel, like let's say he's so good, comes into camp and it's so evident that he's so good, then he'd probably play with Kyzir White, as the nickel linebackers, and then the whole issue of a Mike, a Will, so that kind of gets murky because you're a nickel.
I think we mentioned, Greg, that just describing him, hearing people describe him and what he does, sort of reminds me, and again, nothing is ever apples to apples, for the people. But what Jordan Hicks brought to the Eagles defense a couple of years ago when they drafted him, he was undersized. He did have some history of injuries at Texas, but he was very fast. He was smart. They did blitz with him at that point when they drafted him. In fact, I think he's the one that ended Tony Romo's career, if I'm not mistaken, and led to Dak Prescott getting in a game, if I'm correct with that.
I think that they're a little different stylistically, but your point's a good one. I would say here's the note I typed in my transition, guys, when I finished watching them. And as you guys know, I watched so much Georgia defense, it was coming into my ears. I said there are not many inside linebackers with his combination of play speed and range and short area explosiveness and feel for working in confined space with burst and velocity, plus his outstanding blitzing ability. And the more I watched Dean, the more I felt he was a really strong prospect. That's the way I felt. And I probably watched 7 or 8 games. So, again, it's the height and the injury. That's all you're dealing with. The player has traits that translate and transition well to the NFL.
All right. Speaking of traits and transitioning, we're going to transition to their next pick, who it wasn't until the 6th round. and that was Kyron Johnson from Kansas, who is sort of listed as a linebacker / edge, which led us to discover that he is a kind of guy that, like what we talk about with Hassan Reddick, he is a linebacker, but he's a strong side linebacker who's going to play on the line of scrimmage and rush the passer. Sounds like that's what the Eagles have in mind with Kyron Johnson here from Kansas. What did you see, Greg?
Yeah, he was a fun guy to watch. I actually watched the last 2 years in some detail because I was very curious. When I watched his 2021 tape, he essentially played defensive end. And I'm saying to myself, this guy's not going to play strictly defensive end in the NFL because he's under 6'1" and he's 231. Now, I looked at his numbers at his pro day. Did you guys look at his numbers?
Yes.
They're ridiculous.
Yeah,
I mean,
4.4.
4.4. His 10-yard split was better than most wide receivers. His vertical jump was off the charts. His arm length for a guy who's under 6'1" is not bad. So he was a really fun player to watch. I mean, so I went back to 2020, and I saw he played a little more kind of linebacker-ish, not stacked, but he was bumped out. He played in some 5-man fronts where he was basically an outside linebacker. So it was I got a little better feel. But this guy is, I mean, there's some twitch and some suddenness to the way he moves. He made so many plays with play speed and range running all over the field. Now, he's a little tight-hipped and straight line linear in his movement. He's not loose-hipped, but I mean, this guy played fast with constant motion and energy. Lateral range as a run defender, working down the line of scrimmage. Great balance and body control. I kind of watched him, and I loved watching him, and I kept thinking, okay, what's he going to do in the NFL? Yeah. And then with the Eagles drafting him, my first thought was, well, he's going to be Hassan Reddick's backup because it kind of fits what the Eagles do.
Do you see him, because they drafted Patrick Johnson last year with a late round pick out of Tulane, I think it was.
Yep.
And then they put him in that Jannard Avery role, which is now the Hassan Reddick role, except Reddick's also going to be on the field to rush the passer. So how would you compare those guys and what they did in college and then the traits?
Yeah, and I don't know what they think of Johnson at this point. He got some snaps for a while last year and then kind of didn't. Johnson, to me, is a better pure pass rusher. I thought Patrick Johnson coming out of Tulane was a pass rusher. While Johnson, the Kansas kid, did rush the quarterback, he's not refined at all at rushing the quarterback. Even though he played D end and did have 6 or 7 snaps, he just would rush upfield. He had tremendous get off, and he would run by offensive tackles, which, of course, we know doesn't really happen in the NFL. He's not refined as a pass rusher, Kyron Johnson, at all. Patrick Johnson, to me, was a pass rusher when I watched his tape. So I don't know how that's all going to work out. I guess we're going to find out once they start OTAs and training camp, but he's certainly worthy of a sixth round pick. You said he was?
Yes. Sixth round pick.
Certainly worthy of that. The guy's fun to watch. I mean, he made plays all over the field. Great play speed and range. Really. I mean, that was his game.
So one thing, a couple people asked us, Geoff and I know what it looks like and what it is, but we haven't heard it really explained. People want to know, when you say stack backer, visually, what does it look like and what does it mean to you?
Stacked linebacker?
Yes.
Oh, it means you're behind the defensive line. So you're off the ball. You're behind the defensive line. On the ball, linebacker means you're actually on the line of scrimmage. So stacked backers are off the ball behind the defensive line.
Right. Got it. All right, let's move to the tight end that they got in the 6th round from SMU via, I think, Oklahoma was where he started.
Via Oklahoma, after his sophomore year at Oklahoma, people thought this guy was going to be the next thing.
Yeah.
And then he had a concussion history, and he basically retired. He was going to be a fireman. And then
where have we heard that before with Eagles draft picks?
Yeah.
One in particular.
Yeah.
Wait, wasn't Danny Watkins going to be a fireman?
Yes, he is.
He was more than want to be. He is a fireman now.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably not a good guy to bring up in this discussion.
Why did you bring that? No, you had to bring that up.
How can you not bring up Danny Watkins when you hear about a guy who was going to be a fireman? I mean, come on.
Oh, how did they not know that? Anyway.
Let me tell you something. After his 2019 sophomore season in Oklahoma, because he couldn't come out, people were saying he's one of the next big tight end prospects. I mean, this kid was a 4-star recruit and a top tight end nationally coming out of California. So he had some injuries, as I said, concussion, stepped away from football, came back to play at SMU this year, and I thought he showed many of the same receiving traits. I mean, he's a receiving tight end. That's what he is. He's not a blocker. He predominantly lined up in the slot, significant snaps where he was also split outside. He's a straight line, run straight line movement routes really well. Vertical seams, crossers, corner routes, sail routes. He has really good play speed. You want to build up the play speed. He gives an offense a 3-level dimension with his vertical play speed. That's always in demand in the NFL. I don't think you'll see him when the Eagles want to run the ball in critical running situations as an attached tight end being asked to block defensive ends. My guess is that won't happen. And he may never be that guy. So that means he's probably a number 2 tight end, which is when you draft a guy where he got drafted and you have Dallas Goedert, that's the hope.
Do you think he's pro ready? If the Eagles want to come out in 12 personnel on first or second down, make it look like they want to run and then pop a play action, is he ready to be flexed into the slot and run and catch and do what he needs to do?
I would think if you're giving him limited stuff to do, and let's say you're going to do that 10, 12 times a game, I think he certainly could do that, because then you're going to give him a select number of routes, whether it's a vertical seam, whether it's a corner route, whatever the route is. Sure, he can run those routes. You could come out in 12 personnel, line up in a tight formation, then have then all of a sudden you shift to a spread formation, and sure, you could do all that. Yeah, he's not going to play. Let's say he even makes the team, which is always a question with later round picks. So let's say he makes the team and does well in camp. There's certainly 12, 15 plays a game you can put him out there, knowing that, hey, this is what we're giving him to do, and he can do this.
And they haven't really had that second guy,
They haven't had a second receiver like this.
Right. He's got really. I mean, I saw him at the Senior Bowl. You could just tell his athletic movement, and he's basically 240, which is for a guy.
That's what he is. That's exactly what he is.
Yeah,
he's the receiving tight end,
which is the F in their offense. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Which and so. Is there a place for him? Of course there is. We have to see what happens through the offseason and training camp. But they don't have that guy on their roster right now.
Gotcha. All right, let's move into some of the reported rookie undrafted free agent signings. Adam, which one do you want to start with?
Well, there were 2. Yeah. Can I jump in?
Yeah.
That stood out to me because I did those guys,
corners,
and I thought they were both draftable based on tape. You know me. I don't. Not that I'm unaware of the off the field conversations, but I don't get into that in my evaluations because I just I don't know. I don't know how teams see that stuff. Yeah. So there's 2 corners, and we know they need corners, and they didn't draft a corner. So I thought Mario Goodrich and Josh Jobe were both draft-worthy players based on tape. Goodrich was a big-time recruit to Clemson. For some reason, it didn't work out, and he didn't become a starter until his final season. And I thought there were good things that he showed on tape. Again, I'm not sitting here saying he should have been a top 90 pick. Obviously, every team in the league passed on him over and over and over. So no one saw him as that guy. So I'm not going to sit here, and say, oh, he should have been a top 90 pick. Yeah. But I thought he was a solid corner prospect. He's got length. He's just very light. He's 176. And I think what scared people was the 4.5, 240. But I think he's got good movement traits. I think he can play zone. I think he can play man. The issue when you talk about guys playing press man, which I thought he played pretty well, is can he carry vertical routes being a 4.52 guy? And that is clearly a concern. Okay, I'll be the first to admit it. As much as I thought he was draftable, that I guarantee was a concern for teams. I think the final note I made is Goodrich is like many college corners who possess good traits but lack elite athleticism. And by the way, I wrote all this before the draft. I don't want people to think this happened after he was not drafted.
Yeah.
I wrote all this and did him before the draft. So I said he possesses good traits but lack elite athleticism, so they are not looked at as high draft choices, but they play in the league, and many end up being guys you can play with. That could be what Goodrich is. I knew he wouldn't be a high pick, but he's got traits to play.
Yeah, the knock on him actually was injury related. That's a couple teams.
There you go. That's another knock.
Yeah, that was really the reason why he didn't get drafted. Everything you're saying is correct. It's just that the big reason it knocked him out was injuries. So does
Well, I was going to say then you got Josh Jobe.
Yeah, let's get to him. But we'll get to another question on Goodrich
Now,
later.
he's another guy. He played at Alabama. He's got extensive experience playing every coverage you could ask a guy to play.
It's important.
He's 5'11 and a half, 182, but he's got a very sturdy body. He looks bigger than that. I think he's got man coverage traits to play both mirror match press man and physical jam press man. What he lacks, and again, I know he's got issues, so anything he lacks physically is just exacerbated by the off the field stuff, right, Adam? You know,
correct.
The guy you might say, oh, he's got some good traits, not great. He's a great, nice 5th round pick, but if he's got major issues off the field, that 5th round pick becomes a free agent, which is exactly what happened to Josh Jobe. But what he lacks, based on tape study, is the suddenness and twitch that separates high-level corner prospects. His movement is much more measured and methodical. His transition and change of direction is at times a little tight and segmented. So those traits, tape traits, make him a lower round pick to begin with, and then the off-the-field other issues make him a free agent.
Just getting back to Goodrich for a second, because he's long, but he's only 176. Did you think his lack of bulk was an issue when you watch his tape?
I didn't think it was, because he was very physical and competitive. He was willing to hit and tackle on the perimeter. He had a really aggressive playing personality. Now, you have to take that 176 and decide if that's great in college in the ACC, and does that not transition to the NFL? That's probably a discussion. And I guess you could come down either way on that.
All right. Let's obviously there's also a report out there that the Eagles are going to sign. Oh, I believe it's Fish. Well, they haven't announced it.
They did.
I could Carson Strong?
Yeah, it's definitely
okay. Carson Strong, the quarterback from Nevada. Yeah. Obviously we've known and reported about the medicals. They were a big deal for a lot of teams. And you see he went undrafted.
The other issue, and Adam knows this, and I'm only reciting what I'm told. Obviously, I was not in the room, but I was told by numerous friends of mine in the coaching fraternity that he did not interview well.
Oh, really?
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that. Okay, that's interesting.
Okay.
Which I think, given what kind of quarterback he is, with that bulky knee brace and the concern about any movement at all, given that, which is going to drop him to begin with, and then if he truly did not interview well, and like I said, I'm just reciting what I was told.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm sure that those two things are the reason he did not get drafted.
If I can ask, was it put to you in like a light of he didn't break down the whiteboard well, or he just kind of his character came off as kind of, not what you're looking for?
I think it had more to do with his personality and not the whiteboard.
Man, this year, Greg, I mean, Adam and I talked about this on the podcast, from guys like George Pickens to Jermaine Johnson. I mean, there were some really talented players.
George Pickens was number 1 on a lot of teams' boards, but he was not going to be drafted as the best receiver because of those concerns.
Right. And a lot of this stuff was not legal. The term that I kept hearing from people over and over on a lot of different guys was just kind of a selfish type of player. So it's just very interesting how this.
I mean, I think again, nobody cares about this if they're listening and they're Eagles people, but I think George Pickens is in a great spot with Mike Tomlin as his head coach. Yes. George Pickens is super talented.
So
that franchise knows what it does at wide receiver pretty well.
They do.
They drafted Pickens and Calvin Austin. That was really fascinating.
I know. I could not believe they got Calvin Austin as well. They're amazing. But getting back to Strong, Greg, what did the tape show you when you watched it?
I think there's no mystery to Carson Strong. He's an old school pocket quarterback. His game's built on beating you from the pocket. Again, let's assume I can't speak to the knee injury, but he has very little, if almost no, game-changing second reaction movement ability. I made the note for Strong to succeed as a quality NFL starter, he must master a couple of things. Over time, he must master all the nuances and subtleties of the position, which means that he must also then master the pre-snap phase. He has to be phenomenal working out of moneyed pockets because he's not going to go anywhere. So he has to be able to throw the ball in contested pockets. That is a major, major element for quarterbacks. You have to be able to throw the ball out of muddied, noisy, contested pockets. And it's especially true for quarterbacks like Carson Strong. And then the last thing is the ball placement must be really, really precise. Now, the one thing that did stand out is very aggressive throwing mentality. He made stick throws into tight windows with velocity. He's got a good arm, made some excellent vertical throws. That offense asked him to make a lot of intermediate and vertical throws, more so than most college teams. He can make those throws.
Right.
I would say his throwing ability is higher level, not Carson Palmer higher level, but higher level. So if you're going to play him, he must be protected really well, because otherwise you're not going to be able to perform.
The feedback, Greg, that I got is that you can find guys in the NFL who don't move very well at that position. You know, you can find a Kirk Cousins or a Matthew Stafford who are not known for second reaction plays, but even those guys can buy a little time. They got just enough wiggle compared to Carson Strong, who just has none of it.
None.
As you
and
were
again,
just basically
now
saying.
that comes down to the knee, and can that improve enough that he has some, Geoff? I don't know the answer to that. Teams will know the answer to that because they do all the medicals. I don't know the answer. But this year, watching his tape with that big bulky knee brace, he couldn't move at all. Now, I'll give you a great example. There were a lot of teams that were scared off from Davis Mills a year ago, and he played with a big bulky knee brace. He didn't play with the big bulky knee brace this year in Houston. And while he's never going to be confused for Patrick Mahomes or Russell Wilson, he showed that he could move enough that he was not a statue in the pocket. I don't know whether Carson Strong is that guy or not.
All right. Have you seen any of Britton Covey, the running back?
No, but
okay.
I know people think he's a fun guy, but I didn't see him.
Gotcha.
I know he had made all those plays in the bowl game against Ohio State because I watched it on TV, but I didn't see his tape. No.
Right. And how about the huge guy from Idaho, Noah Ellis?
No.
Okay. That's fine. That's fine.
I don't think I've seen the other free agents other than But when they signed Goodrich and Job, I thought of you guys and said, good, we can talk about those guys.
Oh, yeah.
Because corner is a major position.
Oh, you're exactly right. It's funny because when I got some information, all these players are like the only two that really matter, the two guys who are going to contribute and could actually make the team and actually dress on Sunday would be the two corners, because Greg, Geoff and I have been talking about for months now. They don't have a number 2 or number 3 corner on the outside. They just don't.
No. I mean, again, the Job issue, don't know Josh Job at all. Big time recruit, by the way, just as Goodrich was. So you're not talking about guys with bad pedigrees. You know, these are not free agents from small schools that were 1-star recruits. You know, Goodrich, I think, might have been a 5-star.
Right. So let's end the show then with one last evaluation that kind of ties it all up and fits in with what we've just discussed, because you did watch Trent McDuffie's tape, and he is someone that we understand if the Eagles had stayed at 18, would have strongly considered there, or maybe a trade down and try to get. But either way, they liked him. What did you see from Trent McDuffie, especially knowing that he is a short-armed corner and so doesn't always check off the analytics that the Eagles like? But what did you see?
Well, again, arm length is 29 3/4, which is within the realm. It's under 29 that you get. There's only been one cornerback selected, in now 2 because Roger McCrary, but there's only been one cornerback prior to this draft in the last decade who had arm length under 29 inches, and he didn't make it. So 29 3/4 is, you'd like it to be over 30, but it's not prohibitive. I loved McDuffie's tape, loved his tape. I thought he was a really strong prospect with all the traits you need to play on the outside. You could also move him in the slot. The Eagles wouldn't have done that. They have their slot corner. I think that I loved his ability to play press man. He was physical. He was competitive. He pushed receivers right to the sideline. He squeezed them. He could play mirror match press. He could play physical press. He was competitive. He played the run. He was really good in zone and off coverage. I thought he did everything really well. It's just he's a little smaller than you'd ideally like. Not super small, but a little smaller than you'd ideally like. And then the arm length, which, that matters to teams. I'm not one to sit here and say it does or it doesn't. I haven't done all those studies through the years, although I do know about the arm length for corners, but he's not under 29 inches.
Excellent. Greg, can't thank you enough. It's been a wonderful few months doing the Intel with Greg Cosell with you. The fan feedback has been phenomenal. The content has been great. We really appreciate it. We know this isn't the last. This might be the last Intel with Greg Cosell for now, but I know you will be on the platform again down the road. So look forward to reconnecting with you and getting some more great breakdowns. So
This
thanks
was
for
fun, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Excellent.
Thanks, man.
All right. So for Greg Cosell and Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher, and you've been watching the Intel with Greg Cosell.